He called her dress a disgrace, a pathetic attempt to belong in a world she had been brutally cast out of. Standing in the heart of the Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, Jonathan Crestwood, her ex-husband looked at her with pure disdain, his new, glittering fiancée on his arm. He thought he was delivering the final crushing blow to the woman whose confidence he had spent years dismantling. He thought he had shattered her. He had no idea he was speaking to the most powerful person in the room. What happens next isn't just karma. It's a corporate and social takedown, so spectacular, no one saw it coming. The air in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Sackler wing was thick with the scent of money, a heady perfume of opportunity and narcissism. Light from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park refracted through a galaxy of diamond necklaces and champagne flutes, casting shimmering patterns across the ancient Egyptian temple of Dendo, which served as the gala's majestic, silent centerpiece. This was the Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, the undisputed apex of New York's philanthropic calendar, where fortunes were pledged on a handshake and reputations were made or broken over a canapé. And into this glittering shark tank walked Catherine Dubois. She felt like a ghost, not an ethereal haunting spirit, but the more mundane kind, a person so out of place they might as well be invisible. She wore a dress the color of a midnight storm cloud, a simple, unadorned sheath of slate-grey silk that fell to her ankles. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and no sequins, no feathers, no ostentatious cutouts. In a sea of couture gowns that screamed for attention, Catherine's dress was a whisper she knew that most people here would interpret as a cry for help. Her hand, free of any rings, smoothed down the fabric. It was a nervous gesture, a phantom limb reaching for the wedding band she hadn't worn in 3 years. 3 years since the divorce. 3 years since Jonathan Crestwood had systematically and surgically excised her from the life they had built, convincing her and everyone they knew that she was nothing without him. He was here tonight, of course. She'd seen his name on the preliminary guest list. Jonathan Crestwood, CEO of Crestwood Capital, and Ms. Bianca della Rocha. Even their names on paper looked glossy and expensive. She hadn't seen him in person since the final court date, when he'd looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt, the victor surveying the spoils of a war she hadn't even known they were fighting. Catherine took a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, the bubbles a welcome distraction. Her gaze drifted across the room, a Rolodex of Wall Street titans, tech moguls, and old money scions. She saw Robert Chen, the shipping magnate, locked in conversation with a senator. She saw the socialite triplets, the Patterson sisters, posing for a photographer from Vogue. It was a world she had once navigated as Jonathan's +1, her role limited to smiling demurely, laughing at the right jokes, and never ever outshining her husband. That was the deal. He was the sun, she was the planet existing only to reflect his light. He'd been a rising star at a prestigious investment firm when they met. She'd been a promising software engineer with a revolutionary idea for sustainable energy management systems. She'd put her project on the back burner to support his career, manage their home, and host the dinner parties that greased the wheels of his ascent. He had absorbed her ideas during late-night talks, repackaging her concepts about market inefficiencies and sustainable futures as his own brilliant insights in the boardroom. When he finally launched his own firm, Crestwood Capital, it was built on a foundation she had unknowingly laid. And when he no longer needed that foundation, he'd discarded her. The divorce had been swift and brutal. His lawyers painted her as an unambitious housewife with no claim to the fortune he'd built. She, exhausted and emotionally hollowed out, had taken the paltry settlement just to be free. "Catherine, my God, is that really you?" The voice, dripping with saccharine surprise, cut through her thoughts. She turned. It was Amelia Sterling, a woman whose entire personality was curated by her husband's stock portfolio. She was flanked by 2 other women from Catherine's old life, their eyes doing a rapid forensic scan of her appearance. "Amelia, hello." Catherine said, her voice even. I almost didn't recognize you, Amelia chirped, her eyes lingering on Catherine's dress. The unspoken addendum hung in the air. You look so plain. It's been ages. What have you been up to? We never see you anywhere. Anywhere meant the Hamptons, Aspen, St. Bart's, and charity luncheons, where the main course was gossip. I've been busy, Catherine replied, offering no details. The women exchanged glances. Well, one of them, Marissa said, it's brave of you to come tonight. All things considered. Brave, the word they use for charity cases and lost causes. Catherine gave a small, tight smile. She knew what they were thinking. They thought she was here as a guest of a guest, a forgotten relic hoping to glimpse the life she'd lost. The thought was so far from the truth, it was almost funny. Her gaze was pulled as if by a magnetic force across the room. There he was, Jonathan. He stood near the reflecting pool in front of the temple, looking every bit the master of the universe. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection. His hair was artfully styled, and his laugh was a loud, confident bark that demanded attention. On his arm was Bianca della Rocha. She was stunning in a gown of molten gold, a dress that looked as if it had been poured onto her statuesque frame. She glittered. She shone. She was everything Catherine was not, and everything Jonathan had always wanted. As if sensing her stare, Jonathan's head turned. His eyes swept the crowd, first with indifference, then with a flicker of recognition, and finally with a slow, cruel smirk. He leaned down and whispered something in Bianca's ear. Bianca's perfectly sculpted lips curled into a similar smile of derision. And then they started walking towards her. Catherine's heart didn't pound. Her palms didn't sweat. The woman who would have crumbled 3 years ago was gone. In her place was someone who had spent those years forging herself in the fires of anonymity and ambition. She had taken her paltry settlement, combined it with a small inheritance from her grandmother, and poured every ounce of her being into the project she had abandoned for him. She had founded a company that was about to change the world. She stood her ground, took a deliberate sip of her champagne, and waited. The ghost at the feast was about to be seen. The 10 yards of polished stone floor that separated them felt like a battlefield. As Jonathan and Bianca closed the distance, a small, invisible bubble of silence formed around Catherine. The ambient chatter of the gala seemed to fade, replaced by the thudding of a single defiant drumbeat in her chest. This was the moment she had both dreaded and on some level prepared for since seeing his name on the list. Jonathan stopped a few feet from her, his posture a study in condescending ease. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her simple grey dress, with the theatricality of a stage villain. It wasn't a quick glance. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal designed to inventory her every perceived flaw. Well, well, he began, his voice a smooth baritone sneer that she remembered from the worst of their arguments. Catherine, I have to admit I'm surprised to see you here. Bianca, clinging to his arm, let out a delicate tinkling laugh that was perfectly calibrated to mock. Darling, she purred, her eyes not even meeting Catherine's, instead addressing a point somewhere over her shoulder. I think surprised is an understatement. I thought this was a closed event. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Someone must have made a mistake. Catherine kept her expression neutral, her eyes fixed on Jonathan. It's a fundraiser, Jonathan. It's open to anyone who buys a ticket. She chose her words carefully, a simple statement of fact that refused to engage with their premise. Jonathan's smirk widened. He enjoyed this, she realized. It wasn't enough that he had won. He needed to see her lose again and again. A ticket? Of course. And I'm sure that set you back a pretty penny. Let me guess you sold one of your mother's old brooches. The jab was personal, a cruel reference to the jewellery Catherine's mother had left her pieces she'd been forced to sell early on to make rent after the divorce. He knew exactly which wounds to poke. It's admirable, I suppose. he continued, gesturing vaguely at her, trying to keep up appearances. But honestly, Catherine, you should have saved your money. His eyes went back to her dress, and this time he didn't hold back. That dress, it's a choice. Is that from a vintage shop, or did you make it yourself? I remember your little sewing hobby. Bianca chimed in again, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. It's very minimalist, very sustainable, I'm sure. She looked down at her own glittering gold lame gown. Mine is a custom de la renta. I feel almost guilty wearing it. It could probably fund a small village for a year. She didn't look guilty at all. She looked smug. Every word was a carefully sharpened dart. Vintage, hobby, sustainable. Words they used to mean cheap, amateurish, and poor. They were painting her as a pathetic creature, a little grey mouse scurrying in the corners of their opulent world. Catherine didn't flinch. She thought of the fabric her dress was made from. It was a prototype, a revolutionary biosynthetic silk developed in the labs of her company, Origin Dynamics. It was stronger than steel, softer than cashmere, and 100% biodegradable. A single yard of it was currently worth more than Bianca's entire couture gown. The irony was a suit of armor. It's comfortable, Catherine said simply. Jonathan laughed a harsh barking sound. Comfortable. That's what people say when they can't afford style. Look around you, Catherine. This is the big leagues. People make an effort. Showing up like this. It's not just embarrassing for you, it's disrespectful to the foundation, to the hosts. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was loud enough for those nearby to hear. You look like your staff, a very depressed, very poorly paid member of the waitstaff. A few people in their immediate vicinity had turned to watch the exchange, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity for the drab woman being verbally dismantled by the formidable Jonathan Crestwood and his dazzling partner. This was the kill shot, the final humiliation. He wanted to see her cry. He wanted to see her run from the room in shame. He was trying to erase her, to confirm to himself and the world that she was, and always would be, nothing. But Catherine didn't look away. She didn't shrink. Instead, a strange sense of calm washed over her. It was the calm of absolute certainty. She saw him not as the monster who had haunted her past, but as a man, a predictable, petty, and ultimately insignificant man. He was playing a game whose rules no longer applied to her. He was fighting a war that she had already won on a battlefield he couldn't even see. She gave him a small, enigmatic smile. It was the first genuine smile she'd shown all night. It didn't reach her eyes, but it wasn't meant for him. It was for herself. Thank you for your concern, Jonathan, she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his arrogance with its unexpected serenity. But I'm perfectly comfortable, and I have a feeling I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Without another word, she turned her back on them. She didn't storm off. She didn't retreat. She simply pivoted with graceful finality and walked toward the reflecting pool, leaving Jonathan and Bianca standing there, momentarily stunned by her refusal to be broken. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed Jonathan's face. The scene hadn't played out the way he'd written it. He quickly masked it with a dismissive scoff, turning back to Bianca. Pathetic, he muttered loud enough for Catherine to hear. Truly pathetic. But as Catherine walked away, the pitying stares of the onlookers didn't sting. The whispers didn't cut. All she felt was the smooth, strong fabric of her dress against her skin, a secret she was holding close, and the thrilling, terrifying knowledge that in less than an hour, everyone in this room would know her name. Catherine walked until she reached the far side of the reflecting pool, putting the cold, ancient stone of the temple between her and her past. She stood before the massive sandstone monument, its hieroglyphs telling stories of gods and pharaohs, of endurance and time. In that moment, she felt a kinship with it. It had been moved piece by piece from a world away and reassembled in a foreign land, yet it retained its silent, unshakable dignity. She took a deep, steadying breath, the cool, conditioned air a balm on her frayed nerves. The confrontation had been worse than she'd imagined. The sheer, unadulterated venom in Jonathan's voice, the casual cruelty. It had been a stark reminder of the man she had escaped. A part of her, a small wounded part, felt the sting. The old insecurities whispered at the edges of her mind. You don't belong. They're right. Look at you. She closed her eyes, shutting them out. No, that was the old Catherine. The new Catherine, the one who had worked 18-hour days for 3 years, who had pitched to skeptical venture capitalists, who had built a team of brilliant minds from the ground up, who had created a company now valued at $9 billion that Catherine belonged wherever she damn well pleased. A remarkable structure, isn't it? The voice was calm and distinguished, with a hint of an old-world accent. Catherine opened her eyes and turned. Standing beside her was an elderly gentleman, perhaps in his late 70s, holding a glass of what looked like whiskey. He was impeccably dressed in a classic tuxedo, his silver hair neatly combed, and his eyes behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses were kind and perceptive. She recognized him from the Foundation's board profiles, Arthur Pembroke, a retired diplomat and one of the Starlight Foundation's most respected, long-serving patrons. It is, Catherine agreed, her voice still a little tight. It makes you feel small, or it makes you feel connected to something vast and enduring, Mr. Pembroke countered gently. He took a sip of his drink, his gaze thoughtful. It's all a matter of perspective, my dear. He turned his kind eyes to her. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation just now with Mr. Crestwood. Catherine's posture stiffened slightly. I apologize if it was a disturbance. Not at all, he said, waving a dismissive hand. On the contrary, I was struck by your composure. Most people would not have handled such a boorish display with such grace. He looked pointedly across the pool at Jonathan, who was now holding court with a group of fawning investors, Bianca laughing shrilly at his side. Some people mistake wealth for class, a common and rather vulgar error. Catherine was taken aback by his candour. Thank you, Mr. Pembroke. Arthur, please, he insisted. I make it a point to know the people who matter in a room, and you, my dear, intrigue me. Your name is Catherine Dubois, is it not? She nodded, surprised he knew her name. She wasn't on the board, nor was she a known public figure. At least, not yet. I saw you arrive, Sir, he explained. There's a certain quiet confidence about you that stands out in a room full of peacocks. It's the look of someone who has nothing to prove. It's a look I've come to associate with true power. His words were like a restorative tonic. He saw her. He didn't see a pathetic ex-wife in a plain dress. He saw strength. I'm not sure about power, Catherine demurred, a hint of a genuine smile gracing her lips. I think it's just exhaustion. Arthur Pembroke chuckled a warm, rich sound. The most powerful people often are. It's the ones who are constantly striving, shouting their own importance from the rooftops, that you need to watch out for. They are often the most hollow. His eyes twinkled. Like Mr. Crestwood. Crestwood. Capital, isn't it? I've been reading about them. Heavily leveraged in fossil fuels. A precarious position to be in these days. One might even say it's a dinosaur's strategy. Catherine's interest was piqued. You follow the energy markets, Arthur. I follow anything that involves the future, he said. And the future, Ms. Dubois, is in sustainability. It's in innovation. It's in the hands of people who can see beyond the next fiscal quarter. He looked directly at her, a knowing glint in his eye. I've also been reading about an extraordinary new company, a private firm that's been making massive strides in energy storage and synthetic materials. They've been very quiet, very strategic. Origin Dynamics, I believe it's called. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. He knew. Somehow he knew. She didn't have to confirm it. The look on her face was enough. Arthur's smile was wide and genuine. I had a suspicion when I saw your name on the benefactor's pre-brief. It's a pleasure to finally meet the architect of what I believe will be one of the most important companies of the next century. The validation in his voice, the quiet respect from a man of his stature, was more potent than any public applause. It was a lifeline thrown to her in a moment of doubt. "The world doesn't know about you yet, Catherine," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But tonight it will. I must say, I'm very much looking forward to the look on Mr. Crestwood's face. It promises to be a far more entertaining spectacle than the silent auction." For the first time all evening, Catherine laughed. It was a real, unburdened laugh that seemed to echo slightly in the grand hall. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for this stranger, this unexpected ally who had truly seen her before anyone else. "To the future, then," Arthur said, raising his glass in a small toast. Catherine raised her own flute. "To the future." She echoed, her voice clear and strong. The whispers from her past were finally silent, vanquished by the promise of what was to come. The gala moved into its formal phase. The ambient chatter softened as guests found their designated tables, which were arranged in a grand semicircle facing a stage set up before the temple. Catherine found her seat at table 1, the place of honor, alongside Arthur Pembroke and the foundation's chairwoman, a stern but fair woman named Judith Bell. Catherine's name card simply read K. Dubois, a deliberate act of understatement she had requested. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire room. She saw Jonathan and Bianca at table 3, close enough to be seen, but not at the head table. She watched as Jonathan schmoozed table hopping with practiced ease. He was in his element, a predator, gliding through his natural habitat. He stopped at a table with several partners from the powerful law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, sharing a laugh and a firm handshake. He was selling the illusion of success, and everyone was buying it. Catherine focused on her dinner, a meticulously plated salmon dish, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Crestwood Capital. Arthur's comment had confirmed her own research. Jonathan's firm had doubled down on oil and natural gas futures, a high-risk, high-reward bet that had soured dramatically in the last 6 months with the passage of new international climate accords. The firm was bleeding money. Their investors were getting nervous. Their only path to salvation was a massive pivot toward the green energy sector. They needed to acquire or partner with a company that had the technology they lacked, and they needed to do it fast. She remembered a confidential memo her chief operations officer had shown her just last week. It was an inquiry sent through a third-party acquisition scout, gauging their interest in a potential partnership. The inquiring party was anonymous, but the profile described was a mid-size investment capital firm, heavily vested in traditional energy, looking for a lifeline. The memo had described the firm as desperate. It was Crestwood Capital. She was sure of it. Jonathan was hunting for a deal with Origin Dynamics, and he had no earthly idea that the CEO he was trying to court was the woman he had just publicly humiliated. The dramatic irony was so thick she could almost taste it. The evening's host, a charismatic television personality named James O'Connell, took the stage. He was charming and witty, guiding the wealthy patrons through a live auction for extravagant prizes, a week on a private island, a custom sports car, a walk-on role in a Hollywood blockbuster. Catherine watched as Jonathan bid aggressively on a Patek Philippe watch, getting into a bidding war with a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley. He was determined to win, to put on a public display of his financial might. He finally secured it for $250,000, raising his paddle with a triumphant flourish as Bianca kissed his cheek. The room applauded. Arthur Pembroke leaned over to Catherine, his voice a low murmur. "All hat and no cattle, as the Texans say. $250,000 for a watch when his company is leveraged to the hilt. It's not confidence, my dear. It's sheer terror." Catherine just nodded, a cool understanding settling in her heart. Jonathan wasn't just arrogant. He was desperate. That desperation had fueled his cruelty towards her. He needed to feel powerful, and the easiest way to do that was to make someone else feel powerless. He had tried to use her as a stepping stone for his fragile ego. The auction concluded, having raised an impressive $7 million for the foundation. James O'Connell returned to the podium, his expression growing more serious. "What an incredible night," he began, his voice resonating through the hall. "That $7 million will provide critical medical care for thousands of children. But tonight, we are on the cusp of something truly historic for the Starlight Foundation." A hush fell over the room. Forks were placed down. Conversations ceased. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. "For the past 6 months," O'Connell continued, "our foundation has been in talks with a benefactor, a single private entity that wishes to make a transformative impact. This benefactor saw the scope of our mission and didn't just want to help, they wanted to revolutionize what we are capable of." Across the room, Catherine could see Jonathan leaning back in his chair, a smug look on his face. He was probably assuming it was one of his colleagues, an old money family like the Rockefellers or a tech giant like Google. He looked relaxed, proprietary, even as if the announcement was part of the grand spectacle he had paid to witness. "Tonight," O'Connell's voice swelled with emotion, "I am honored to announce the largest single donation in the history of the Starlight Children's Foundation. A donation that will not only fully fund our new research hospital, but will also create a permanent endowment to ensure our work continues for generations to come." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, a collective holding of breath. Catherine felt her own heart begin to beat faster. The ticking clock had run out. This was it. "This transformative gift," O'Connell declared, his voice booming, "is a one-time grant of $500 million. A tidal wave of gasps and shocked murmurs swept through the audience. $500 million. It was an unfathomable sum, even for this crowd. People were looking around trying to guess the source. Jonathan's smug expression had been replaced by one of genuine astonishment. His head was swiveling, trying to locate the titan in their midst. "This incredible act of philanthropy," O'Connell beamed, "comes from a company that believes, as we do, that the future is our greatest investment. A true visionary in the world of technology and sustainable energy." Catherine saw Jonathan lean forward, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Energy technology. His mind was surely racing through the list of known players: Tesla, First Solar, Ørsted. Catherine took one last deep breath and met Arthur's supportive gaze. He gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," O'Connell announced, his voice ringing with triumph, "please join me in thanking the benefactor of this historic gift, the leader in next-generation green technology, Origin Dynamics." The name hung in the air for a moment, an unknown quantity to most people in the room. A polite, slightly confused applause began to ripple through the crowd. Jonathan's face was a mask of utter confusion. Origin Dynamics. He'd heard the name. It was the unicorn, the private, untouchable firm his scouts were desperately trying to get a meeting with. But O'Connell wasn't finished. "And Origin Dynamics is not just a faceless corporation. It is driven by the vision of one person, the brilliant mind who founded the company, who serves as its CEO, and who is here with us tonight. A woman who has personally pledged this gift on her company's behalf." He scanned the room, a wide smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and CEO of Origin Dynamics. Please give a huge round of applause to Ms. Catherine Dubois." For a full 3 seconds, the name hung in the air, suspended in a state of collective disbelief. Catherine Dubois. The name was familiar to some as Jonathan Crestwood's forgotten ex-wife. To others, it meant nothing at all. But connected to Origin Dynamics and a $500 million donation, it was a logical impossibility. Then a spotlight operator, guided by a frantic stage manager, found her at table. A brilliant white beam cut through the dim, elegant lighting of the hall, illuminating Catherine in its stark, unforgiving glare. There was no hiding. She was no longer a ghost in a grey dress. She was the epicenter of a shockwave that was tearing through the most powerful room in New York City. The polite, confused applause faltered and died. The silence that followed was deafening thick with shock and utter incomprehension. Every single head in the room swiveled first to the woman bathed in light, and then, as if pulled by a collective gossipy instinct, to table 3. Jonathan Crestwood was frozen. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly mask of disbelief. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, not the invisible one she had felt like earlier, but a vengeful billion-dollar specter from his past. His mind was clearly struggling to connect two irreconcilable facts: the pathetic, dowdy woman he had eviscerated an hour ago, and the philanthropic titan being celebrated on stage. The system crashed. The logic board fried. Nothing computed. Bianca Della Rocca was faring no better. Her perfectly made-up face was a canvas of horror. Her jaw, which had been set in a permanent line of smug superiority, had gone slack. The custom Della Renta gown suddenly seemed garish, a desperate costume on a woman who had just been rendered utterly irrelevant. Her eyes darted from Catherine to Jonathan, and back again, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. Catherine rose from her seat. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and imbued with a grace no one in the room had ever credited her with possessing. The simple, slate-grey dress, which had been an object of ridicule, now seemed something else entirely. It wasn't plain. It was elegant in its understatement. It wasn't cheap. It was a statement of quiet, unassailable confidence. In the stark white of the spotlight, the fabric seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence, a subtle hint of the advanced technology woven into its very fibers. Arthur Pembroke and Judith Bell, the Foundation's chairwoman, also stood, leading a new wave of applause. This time, it wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was the sound of 3 of the world's most cynical people acknowledging they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. It was the sound of a paradigm shift. As Catherine made her way toward the stage, the short walk felt like a marathon. She passed tables of people she had once known. People who had pitied her, ignored her, written her off. She saw Amelia Sterling, her face a comical picture of shock, her wineglass paused halfway to her lips. She saw the Sullivan and Cromwell partners, their expressions shifting from amusement at Jonathan's expense to sharp calculating interest. They were lawyers. They could smell power, and the scent coming off Catherine Dubois was intoxicating. She did not look at Jonathan as she passed his table, but she could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight of burning humiliation. She could feel his world tilting on its axis, the foundations of his arrogance and self-worth crumbling into dust. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and shook James O'Connell's outstretched hand. He looked at her with newfound awe and respect. "Ms. Dubois," he said, his voice low and earnest into the microphone. "On behalf of the Starlight Foundation, I am speechless. Thank you." Catherine walked to the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of jewels and tuxedos, and stunned expressions. Her eyes scanned the room until they found him, just for a second. She met Jonathan's gaze across the crowded hall. In his eyes she saw it all, the shock, the rage, the dawning horrific understanding of his own colossal misjudgment. He had not only mocked the woman he divorced, he had insulted the CEO of the company he was desperately trying to partner with to save his own. He had ridiculed the dress of the billionaire who had just become the most celebrated philanthropist in the city. She broke eye contact, turning her attention back to the room at large. She was done with him. He was a footnote in her story now. She took a breath, her hands resting lightly on the sides of the lectern. The room was utterly silent, waiting for her to speak. The ghost was about to find her voice. "Good evening." Catherine began, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone to fill every corner of the vast hall. There was no tremor of nervousness, no hint of triumph. There was only a quiet, resolute authority. 3 years ago, she said, letting the words hang in the air, I found myself with an unexpected gift, the gift of a blank slate, a chance to start over. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. It gave me the space to return to an idea I had set aside long ago, an idea born from a simple belief that the most powerful innovations are those that create a sustainable and equitable future for everyone. She didn't need to say what prompted this gift. Everyone in the room who knew her story could fill in the blanks. Jonathan squirmed in his seat, the indirect reference, a spotlight far hotter than the one on stage. That belief is what led to the creation of Origin Dynamics. She continued, her tone becoming more passionate, more animated. My team and I, a group of the most brilliant and dedicated minds I have ever met, have spent every waking hour since then developing technologies we believe will fundamentally change our relationship with energy. We're not just building better solar panels or more efficient batteries. We are creating a new ecosystem, a future where energy is not only clean and abundant, but accessible to all. She paused, looking out at the rapt audience. We have been fortunate to be successful, very successful. This was a colossal understatement, and the quiet way she delivered it held more power than any boast. But what is the point of building a better future if we do not protect the children who are destined to inherit it? The Starlight Children's Foundation doesn't just heal sick children, it gives them a chance at that future. It provides hope where there is despair, and it is a beacon of what is possible when compassion is paired with action. She then gestured to her own dress, the simple slate grey sheath. The ridicule I received earlier for this dress was in a way understandable in this setting. She said, a murmur going through the crowd as they rolled the ugly scene. Bianca della Rocha looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Jonathan's face was now a deep, florid red. But this dress, Catherine went on, is more than just fabric. It is a symbol of our philosophy at Origin. It's made from a prototype biosilk we developed in our labs. It is created from organic carbon-capturing materials, requires 90% less water than traditional silk production, and is ounce for ounce stronger than Kevlar. It looks simple, but it is the product of immense complexity, innovation, and a commitment to substance over style. It represents our core belief: the most profound strength is often the one you cannot see. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The dress wasn't a mark of poverty, it was a trophy of innovation. It was a wearable testament to her company's and her own success. The ultimate, if you know status symbol in a room obsessed with them, and none of them had known. Origin Dynamics is donating $500 million to the Starlight Foundation tonight, because we are in the business of building the future, and there is no future without healthy children. We are honored and humbled to be a part of your mission. She looked up, her speech concluded. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't gloated. She had not mentioned Jonathan's name once. And in doing so, she had delivered the most devastating social and professional obliteration imaginable. She hadn't needed to stoop to his level. She had simply risen so far above it that he ceased to matter. Her success was her revenge. The room erupted. It was a standing ovation, spontaneous and overwhelming. People were not just clapping, they were cheering. They were applauding the money, yes, but they were also applauding the story. The underdog, the quiet genius, the woman who had turned personal rubble into a global empire and had done so with breathtaking class. As Catherine stepped back from the podium, Arthur Pembroke was the first to greet her, his eyes shining with pride. "Magnificent, my dear," he whispered. "Absolutely magnificent." The stage was soon flooded with people: foundation board members, philanthropists, Wall Street investors who had ignored her a mere hour ago and were now desperate for an introduction. She was mobbed, surrounded by a sea of outstretched hands and congratulatory shouts. Across the room, at table 3, the scene was one of utter devastation. People were actively avoiding it. The chairs around Jonathan and Bianca were empty. He was a pariah, a man who had publicly backed the wrong horse in the most spectacular fashion. He had mocked the woman who held the keys to his company's survival. He had revealed himself to be not just cruel, but a catastrophic fool. A waiter, oblivious, approached their table. "More champagne, Mr. Crestwood." Jonathan just stared blankly ahead, the sounds of Catherine's ovation washing over him like acid. He had spent 3 years believing he was the sun. He had just learned in the most public way possible that he was nothing more than a black hole, and her star had just gone supernova. A week after the Aura Airlines deal had detonated on the launch pad, the air in Seattle felt different. It was crisp and charged with the energy of creation, a stark contrast to the stale atmosphere of recrimination that now choked the executive suites in Chicago. The headquarters of Stellara Air was not a fortress of old money like Aura Tower, but a sprawling, light-filled campus of glass and cedar designed to foster interaction, not intimidation. It was here that the future of Vector Dynamics Aerospace would be reborn. Dr. Althea Grant and David Chen were met not by an assistant, but by Stellara's CEO, Maria Flores, and her chief technology officer, a brilliant, fast-talking engineer named Ben Carter. There was no formal procession to a sterile boardroom. Instead, they were led to a top-floor innovation lounge, a dynamic space with modular furniture, interactive smart walls, and a stunning panoramic view of Puget Sound. "Dr. Grant, it's an honor," Maria said, her handshake firm and her eyes conveying a respect that was immediate and genuine. "Ben and I have been following your work since your postdoc at MIT. Your thesis on quantum data arrays literally changed the way our R&D division approached predictive modeling." Ben Carter jumped in, his enthusiasm barely contained. "The elegance of the Odyssey system's architecture, Doctor. The way you parallel process the atmospheric and fleet-wide logistical data is nothing short of revolutionary. We have 1,000 questions. How did you solve the latency issue with transoceanic data relays? Is the core A adaptable for ground crew optimization?" For the next hour, there was no talk of contracts, indemnification clauses, or market share. It was a high-level, passionate exchange of ideas between peers. Althea, who had been forced to defend her very presence on an Aura flight, was now being celebrated for her mind. She stood at one of the smart walls, sketching out complex data pipelines, explaining the nuances of the machine learning algorithms. She didn't just answer their questions, she expanded upon them, articulating a vision that went far beyond the current scope of Odyssey. "The system as it stands is designed to optimize flight," Althea explained, her marker flying across the digital screen. "But the core principles, predictive analysis, systemic integrity checks, can be applied to the entire operational chain. Imagine predictive maintenance scheduling based on real-time engine performance data or dynamic gate assignments calculated an hour before landing to minimize taxi time across the entire airport. This isn't just about saving fuel in the air, it's about building a perfectly efficient, holistic system from the moment a passenger books a ticket to the moment they retrieve their bag." Maria and Ben exchanged a look of pure excitement. This was a level of vision Robert Caldwell could never have comprehended. Maria shared a brief, knowing smile with Althea. "You know, when I was first starting out as an aerospace engineer, a senior manager told me I should switch to marketing because it was more suited to my temperament. I see a fire in you, Doctor, that I recognize well. It's the fire of someone who has had to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. We don't just want your technology, we want that fire here at Stellara." The deal they struck that afternoon was unprecedented. Not only did Stellara commit to the $150 million Odyssey integration, but they enthusiastically embraced Althea's broader vision. They announced an additional $50 million investment to co-found and build the Stellara VDA Skylab, a dedicated research and innovation hub that Althea herself would lead. Later that day, as they walked across the campus toward the auditorium for the press conference, David Chen shook his head in wonder. "I've known Bob Caldwell for 10 years, Althea," he said, his voice laced with a newfound contempt. "I never thought he was a genius, but I never imagined he was a fool of such historic proportions. He had the future in his hands and let it slip away because he couldn't see past the color of your skin." "I've been thinking about that," Althea said, her gaze distant. "About how this became so public. I never wanted to be a #David. The attention is unsettling, but it's also a platform. If people are going to talk about this, they should be talking about the right things. Not just about me or one airline, but about the bigger principle." The press conference was packed. This was no longer just an aviation industry story. It was a major national news event. Reporters from tech journals, financial papers, and network news were all present, their cameras forming a wall of flashing lights. Maria Flores delivered a powerful opening statement about innovation integrity and partnership, her words a masterclass in strategic messaging. Then came the Q&A, and the questions were sharp. The first was the inevitable pointed query about her message for Caldwell and Brenda. Althea answered with the same grace and dignity she had shown all along, steering the conversation toward principle, not personality. Then a tech reporter stood up. "Dr. Grant, beyond the Odyssey system, what does this new partnership with Stellara enable?" Here, Althea's face lit up with genuine passion. "It enables us to ask, what's next? The Skylab isn't just about refining what we've already built. It's about pioneering the next frontier, fully autonomous ground logistics, AI-driven safety protocols that can predict component fatigue before it happens, building a truly sustainable model for air travel. It's about moving from reactive problem-solving to a future of predictive perfection." Finally, a reporter from a major news network raised her hand. "Dr. Grant, this incident has sparked a national conversation about race and respect, particularly in service industries. Do you feel a responsibility to be a voice in that conversation?" Althea took a deep breath, stepping closer to the microphone. "I feel a responsibility to do my job with excellence and to treat others with respect. That is a responsibility we all share. The conversation this has sparked is important, but it should not require a $150 million contract to be at stake for us to listen. Dignity shouldn't have a price tag. Respect shouldn't be reserved for the first-class cabin. It is the fundamental currency of a decent society. My hope is that my work and the integrity of partners like Stellara Air speaks for itself. And I hope it encourages a world where everyone's worth is recognized on site, no boarding pass required." Her words were met with a rare moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of applause. Miles away, the echoes of that applause fell on deaf ears. Robert Caldwell sat in his cavernous, silent home office, the television screen showing Althea's triumphant face. His phone lay dark on the desk. He'd spent the day calling old business school classmates and corporate contacts, fishing for opportunities. The responses were all variations of the same polite dismissal. "It's a tough market right now, Bob," or "let me see who I know and get back to you," the corporate world's equivalent of a permanent goodbye. He was no longer a player. He was a cautionary tale and untouchable. In a drab, fluorescent-lit unemployment office across town, Brenda O'Malley sat clutching a ticket with the number E47. She was waiting to be counseled on her re-employment prospects. The woman next to her was scrolling on her phone and laughed. "Hey, you see this?" she said to her friend. "It's about that racist flight attendant from Aura. Serves her right." Brenda shrank in her plastic chair, pulling her collar up her face, burning with a shame so profound it was physically painful. She, who had once patrolled the aisles with an air of absolute authority, was now an anonymous, disgraced number in a queue. But the final scene of this saga was not one of wreckage, it was one of creation. The following Monday, Althea walked into the newly christened Stellar of Day Skylab. It was a vibrant open space already buzzing with energy. A diverse team of V-Day veterans and bright young Stellara engineers were gathered around a central cluster of whiteboards. "Okay, team," Althea said, picking up a green marker, a broad smile on her face. "The Odyssey system is yesterday's news. Today we start designing its replacement. No idea is too crazy. Let's build the future." An excited chatter filled the room as engineers rushed to the boards, sketching, debating, and collaborating. Althea stood in the middle of it all, not just as an engineer, but as a leader, a conductor of a symphony of innovation. The camera of her life pulled back to reveal a scene, not of a lone genius, but of a thriving community working together to build something better. This was the new horizon, not just a destination, but a new, more hopeful way of making the journey. And just like that, Catherine Dubois didn't just win, she rewrote the entire game. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that true value isn't measured in couture gowns or public opinion, but in resilience, vision, and the quiet, unwavering belief in oneself. She built her empire not to prove her ex-husband wrong, but to prove herself right. His humiliation was simply a byproduct of her spectacular success. If Catherine's story of quiet strength and ultimate triumph inspires you, and you believe in the power of rising from the ashes, show your support by hitting that like button. It tells us you want more stories of incredible empowerment. What do you think was going through Jonathan's mind the exact moment her name was called? Let us know in the comments below. He thought he was winning, posting lavish photos from a 5-star spa with his mistress on his arm. He pictured his heavily pregnant ex-wife Chloe, alone, heartbroken, and scrolling through his perfect life. But he made one mistake. He forgot to check the background of his own photos. While he was sipping champagne in a fluffy robe, Chloe was also in the air, not crying in coach, but flying first class, seated next to Billionaire CEO Sebastian Davenport. And Sebastian wasn't just offering her a tissue, he was offering her a future her ex could never have imagined. This isn't a story about revenge, it's about an upgrade. Chloe Sterling believed in the architecture of a perfect life. It was a belief she had cultivated over 32 years, one built on the solid foundations of a privileged upbringing, an art history degree from a prestigious university, and a marriage that from the outside looked as immaculate as the minimalist Los Angeles home she shared with her husband, Marcus Thorne. Their life was a carefully curated Instagram feed of success and happiness. Weekend trips to Napa charity galas, where their smiles gleamed under the flash of cameras, and cozy Sunday mornings with their golden retriever, Winston. Marcus was a man carved from ambition. He had that sharp, predatory charm that often masquerades as charisma in the world of tech startups. His company, Innovate, was his first love, a demanding and all-consuming partner that promised to revolutionize the digital marketing space. Chloe had been his steadfast supporter, the graceful, intelligent wife who hosted flawless dinner parties for potential investors and edited his late-night emails until the words sang with an eloquence he himself didn't possess. She was the silent, uncredited co-founder of the man he had become. Now, at 7 months pregnant, Chloe felt the familiar structure of her life beginning to shift. The impending arrival of their son, a tiny human she already loved with a fierce, primal intensity, was supposed to be the final beautiful addition to their perfect picture. Instead, it felt like a fault line, a subtle tremor beneath the polished marble floors of their existence. The distance between them had grown insidiously. It started with small things. Marcus, who once couldn't fall asleep without his hand resting on her stomach, now worked late into the night, often sleeping in the guest room to avoid waking her with his pre-dawn calls. Their conversations, once filled with shared dreams and intimate jokes, had become logistical, revolving around his schedule, his stress, his monumental climb to the top. It's just until the Series B funding closes, Angel, he'd say, his voice a low, tired hum as he kissed the top of her head, his eyes already on his phone. Everything I'm doing for us, for him. Chloe wanted to believe him. She clung to the memory of the man she had married, the passionate, attentive man who had once quoted poetry to her in a rain-soaked Parisian park. But lately, his reassurances felt hollow, like echoes in the cavernous space that had opened up between them. The scent of an unfamiliar, cloyingly sweet perfume clung to his suits some evenings, a scent he'd dismiss as probably from someone at the office. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket, angled away from her, a digital fortress she couldn't breach. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in their sprawling, silent house. She'd spend hours in the nursery. She had meticulously designed a serene space of soft greys and blues, rocking in the glider and talking to her unborn son. She told him about the father she hoped Marcus would be the father he once was. She was trying to convince herself as much as the baby. The breaking point, though she didn't know it at the time, came on a Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine from their perfectly manicured garden. Chloe was making breakfast, a wave of nausea cresting over her, when Marcus walked into the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp, dark suit. He was radiating an almost manic energy, a stark contrast to her own sluggish, pregnant fatigue. "Morning, Angel," he said, bypassing her for the espresso machine. "Big day?" "Bigger than usual?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Massive," he confirmed, not turning around. "I have to fly out this morning. A last-minute meeting with some investors in New York. This could be it, Chloe. The final push." A cold dread seeped into Chloe's bones, colder than the marble countertop beneath her hands. "New York. When were you going to tell me? Just found out late last night. Didn't want to wake you," he said finally, turning to face her. He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were distant, opaque. "It's just for a couple of days. 3 at the most. I'll be back before you even miss me." The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was almost an insult. Marcus was a meticulous planner. A last-minute international business trip was as likely as him suddenly deciding to become a monk. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. "Marcus," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My final prenatal class is on Thursday. You promised you'd come. We're practicing breathing techniques." He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was a sound she had been hearing more and more often. "Chloe, this is a multi-million-dollar deal. I think we can afford to miss one breathing class. Just record it or something. I have to do this. For us." There it was again. For us. The justification for every absence, every broken promise, every lonely night. He used those 2 words like a shield, deflecting any of her needs or concerns. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in what felt like months. The man standing before her was a stranger in a familiar suit. His eyes, which used to hold her with such warmth, now seemed to look right through her. He was already gone. He had left her long before this phantom trip to New York. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet, defeated. She couldn't summon the energy to fight. The baby inside her kicked a small, insistent reminder of what was truly important. "Okay, Marcus. Be safe." He walked over and gave her a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. His lips were cool, his touch fleeting. "I'll call you from the airport," he promised. Chloe knew he wouldn't. She watched from the window as his Uber pulled away, a sleek black car disappearing down their palm-lined street. The house fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't just empty. It was heavy with unspoken truths and the bitter taste of betrayal. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a protective gesture. It was her and the baby now. They were a team. Later that day, a package arrived. It was a ridiculously expensive, state-of-the-art baby monitor, the kind with biometric sensors and a live feed to your phone. A gift from Marcus ordered online. A text message pinged on her phone a moment later. Marcus, for the little man. See, always thinking of you both. The gesture, meant to be placating, felt like a slap in the face. He couldn't be there to hold her hand during a breathing class, but he could buy a gadget to monitor their child from a distance. He was outsourcing his presence, automating his role as a father and a husband. Chloe stared at the box, at the smiling, perfect family on the packaging. It was a caricature of the life she thought she was building. Her own perfect life was a gilded cage, and she was finally beginning to see the bars. And she was realizing with a terrifying clarity that the door had been left wide open. The first 24 hours after Marcus left were a study in hollow routines. Chloe moved through her immaculate home like a ghost, the silence amplifying her anxieties. She attended her prenatal yoga class, the instructor's soothing words about breathing through discomfort, feeling like a cruel joke. She made a healthy dinner. She couldn't eat the taste of betrayal, curdling her appetite. She tried to read, but the words blurred into meaningless symbols. Every ping of her phone sent a jolt of false hope through her system, but it was never him. The promised call from the airport never came. By the second day, a quiet rage began to smolder beneath her grief. It was the anger of a woman who had poured her soul into a partnership only to suspect she had been watering a plastic plant. She had trusted him, implicitly, defended his absences to concerned friends, and sublimated her own needs for the sake of his ambition. For what? So he could lie to her face about a multi-million-dollar deal in New York. Her sister Amelia called that afternoon. Amelia was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in San Francisco, and she had never been Marcus's biggest fan. She saw the ambition in him, not as drive, but as a runaway train. "So, how's Captain Industry?" Amelia asked, her voice laced with its usual skepticism. "He's in New York," Chloe said the words, tasting like ash. "A last-minute business trip." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Amelia could read Chloe's silences better than anyone. "A last-minute trip to New York. The week of your final Lamaze class. Right. He said it was important," Chloe said, her voice small. "And you believed him." Chloe didn't answer. The silence was her confession. "Chloe," Amelia said, her tone softening. "Are you okay?" "I don't know what I am," she whispered, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. "Listen to me," Amelia said, her voice firm again. "You're coming up here for Mom's birthday this weekend. I already booked your flight. First class so you and my nephew can be comfortable. It's non-negotiable. You need to get out of that house." The thought of escaping, of being with her family, was a lifeline. "Okay," Chloe agreed, a wave of relief washing over her. "Okay, I'll come." It was that evening that the world fell apart. Chloe was aimlessly scrolling through Instagram, a masochistic habit of looking at other people's perfect lives while hers was imploding. She wasn't following Marcus. He claimed social media was a distraction. But she did follow a few of his junior employees, young, hungry tech bros who documented their lives with a relentless fervor. And that's when she saw it. A young man named Josh Miller, one of Marcus's coders, had posted a story. It was a group photo, tagged with a location, the Serenity Peak Resort and Spa, Aspen, Colorado. Not New York. Aspen. For a moment, Chloe's brain refused to process the information. It was a mistake, a coincidence. But then she zoomed in, and there, in the background, unmistakable, even in the slightly blurry shot, was Marcus. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a champagne flute in his hand. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a plush white robe, the resort's logo embroidered on the chest, and his arm was wrapped tightly around a woman. It wasn't a colleague. It wasn't a potential investor. The woman was leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand possessively on his chest. She was stunning in a way that felt like a personal attack. Long, dark hair, a perfect figure, barely concealed by her own white robe, and a smug, self-satisfied smile. Chloe recognized her instantly. Isabella Rossi, a brand strategist who had been consulting for Innovate for the past 6 months. The woman whose cloyingly sweet perfume had been clinging to Marcus's clothes. The digital dagger twisted. Chloe's fingers, numb and clumsy, tapped on Isabella's tagged profile. It was public, and it was a horror show. The latest post from only an hour ago was a close-up. 2 champagne flutes clinking together. The caption read, "Celebrating a successful merger. Aspen, # getaway, #love." In the reflection of one of the glasses, she could see Marcus's face smiling at Isabella. Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just an affair. It was a whole other life. A parallel narrative he had been constructing while she was at home picking out paint colors for their son's nursery. The Series B funding, the late-night calls, the stress. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted alibi for a sordid tryst at a luxury spa. She swiped through Isabella's feed, each photo a fresh wave of nausea. Pictures of them, hiking their faces flushed and happy. A shot of 2 pairs of ski boots outside a chalet door. A selfie of Isabella in a bikini, in a steaming outdoor hot tub. The snowy mountains in the background. She was living a honeymoon fantasy with another woman's husband. But the final soul-crushing blow was a photo Isabella had posted to her story. It was of Marcus asleep in a massive opulent bed, the morning light streaming in. He looked peaceful, content. The caption was a single word, "mine." Chloe dropped her phone as if it had burned her. A guttural sob escaped her. A sound of such profound pain it barely sounded human. The perfect life she had built, the future she had envisioned, it all shattered, in that one moment, the shards slicing into her heart. He wasn't just cheating on her, he was flaunting it. He was humiliating her, secure in the belief that she was safely at home, naive and unsuspecting. The rage that had been smouldering now erupted into a wildfire. The grief was still there, a vast black ocean of it, but now it was fueled by a burning righteous fury. How dare he? How dare he do this to her, to their unborn child? Her phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. "Marcus, hey Angel, NY is exhausting, all business, missing you like crazy. How's my little guy?" The audacity of it, the sheer breathtaking hypocrisy was almost comical. Chloe stared at the message, her vision blurring with tears of anger. She didn't reply. She would never reply to that man again. Instead, she stood up, her movements stiff and deliberate. She walked into their shared bedroom, the room where he had lied to her for months, and pulled her suitcase from the top of the closet. She didn't pack frantically. Her actions were calm, methodical. She packed for herself and for her son. She packed the soft, tiny clothes she had so lovingly folded. She packed the ultrasound photos, the tangible proof of the life they had created, a life he had so casually discarded. She walked past the expensive baby monitor still in its box, a monument to his hollow gestures. She left her wedding and engagement rings on top of it, the diamonds catching the light, suddenly looking cold and foreign. They were props from a play where she had been the unwitting fool. As she walked out the door, she didn't look back. The gilded cage was no longer her home. It was just a house filled with expensive furniture and cheap lies. Her sister's words echoed in her mind. It's non-negotiable. She was right. Leaving wasn't just a choice. It was a necessity. Her flight to San Francisco wasn't just an escape anymore. It was the first step into a new, unknown, and terrifyingly uncertain future. But it would be a future built on truth, not on the beautifully curated lies of Marcus Thorne. The fluorescent lights of LAX felt harsh and unforgiving, mirroring the raw, exposed state of Chloe's emotions. Every smiling couple she saw sent a fresh pang of anguish through her. Every advertisement for a romantic getaway felt like a personal taunt. She moved through the security line in a daze, her body on autopilot, while her mind endlessly replayed the images from Isabella's Instagram feed. Marcus's laugh, Isabella's smug smile, the two of them wrapped in a cocoon of betrayal. She felt a deep, chilling shame, as if his infidelity were a stain on her own character. Had she been that naive? That blind? The questions circled relentlessly vultures in her mind. She clutched her carry-on bag, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the floor. She just had to get to the gate. Boarding the plane offered a small reprieve. The quiet, hushed atmosphere of the first-class cabin was a world away from the chaotic terminal. A flight attendant with a warm smile greeted her by name and guided her to her seat, a spacious pod that promised privacy and comfort. Chloe sank into the plush leather, the sheer luxury of it all, feeling dissonant with her inner turmoil. Amelia had insisted on it, and for the first time, Chloe understood why it wasn't about the luxury. It was about having a small protected space in which to be broken. She stowed her bag, buckled her seatbelt, and immediately turned to stare out the window, hoping to create an impenetrable wall around herself. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to make eye contact. She just wanted to be invisible, to shrink into herself until she reached San Francisco. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." The voice was deep calm and unexpectedly close. Chloe flinched, startled out of her reverie. She turned ready to offer a mumbled apology, and her breath caught in her throat. The man standing in the aisle was not what she expected. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit couldn't conceal. His hair was a dark, rich brown, with a few distinguished flecks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, were looking at her with an expression of gentle amusement, not annoyance. There was an aura of quiet authority about him, an unforced confidence that was utterly different from Marcus's brash, performative swagger. "Oh," Chloe stammered, fumbling for her boarding pass. "I'm so sorry. I'm in 2A. He glanced at her ticket, and then at the seat number next to her. "And I'm in 2B. It seems we're neighbors. I was just making a bad joke. My apologies." He offered a small, disarming smile. "I saw your boarding pass. I'm Sebastian Davenport." The name registered with a jolt. Sebastian Davenport. Even in her self-imposed exile from Marcus's world, she knew that name. He was the CEO of Davenport Industries, a massive multinational conglomerate with interests in sustainable technology and ethical investments. He was a titan of industry, but a different kind of titan from the ones in Marcus's orbit. Davenport was known for his integrity, his philanthropic work, and his almost mythical aversion to the public eye. He was the kind of man Marcus aspired to be, but lacked the substance to become. "Chloe," she managed to say, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "Chloe Sterling." "A pleasure to meet you, Chloe," he said, his voice smooth and low. He settled into his seat with an easy grace, giving her a wide berth, as if sensing her fragility. He didn't try to force a conversation. Instead, he simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. The flight attendant came by, offering pre-departure beverages. "Champagne, Mr. Davenport?" she asked brightly. "Just sparkling water for me, thank you, Catherine." He replied, his smile easy and familiar. "Mrs. Sterling." The word "Mrs." was a fresh stab. "Just water for me too, please," Chloe whispered. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Chloe clutched the armrests, a wave of anxiety washing over her. The turbulence of the takeoff felt like a physical manifestation of her life's sudden violent upheaval. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the breathing techniques she was supposed to have practiced with Marcus. A single traitorous tear slipped out from beneath her eyelid. She hastily wiped it away, mortified that this powerful, sophisticated man next to her might see her crying. Takeoff can be unsettling, a quiet voice said beside her. She opened her eyes to see Sebastian Davenport looking at her, not with pity, but with a simple, kind understanding. He wasn't looking at her tear-streaked face, but at her white-knuckled grip on the armrest. It's not usually, she admitted, her voice thick. It's just been a long day. I understand, he said simply. He didn't press. He didn't ask questions. He just acknowledged her distress, a small act of grace that felt monumental. He then returned to his book, granting her the space she so desperately needed. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin settled into a peaceful hum. Chloe tried to distract herself with the in-flight entertainment system, but her mind was too turbulent. She found herself surreptitiously glancing at the man beside her. He was completely absorbed in his book, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was nothing like Marcus, who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes without checking his phone, his mind always jumping to the next deal, the next angle. Sebastian possessed a stillness, a centeredness that was both intimidating and deeply calming. Feeling a sudden sharp kick from within, Chloe gasped softly and placed a hand on her belly. Sebastian looked up from his book, his blue eyes softening as they fell on her hand. Everything all right? Chloe nodded, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. He's just saying hello. He seems to like flying. A warm, genuine smile transformed Sebastian's face, erasing the serious corporate lines. A future pilot, perhaps? How far along are you, if you don't mind me asking? 7 months, she said. My sister has 2 boys. She said the 3rd trimester was a mix of complete exhaustion and incredible anticipation. He said, his tone conversational and warm. That's a very accurate description, Chloe found herself saying, a small laugh escaping her. It felt foreign, like an old language she was just now remembering. For a few minutes, they talked about parenthood, his joy at being an uncle, her hopes and fears for her son. The conversation was easy, effortless. He didn't talk about himself or his business. He asked her questions, listened intently to her answers, and made her feel for the first time in a long time seen. He was so profoundly different from Marcus. Marcus saw her pregnancy as another project to be managed, another box to be checked on the list of a successful life. Sebastian seemed to see it as a miracle. As the flight attendant came to take their meal orders, Chloe realized she was actually hungry. The knot of anxiety in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a tentative calm. She ordered the salmon, and when it arrived, she ate every bite. Their conversation flowed throughout the meal. They talked about books, art, and travel. He spoke of his philanthropic work in Africa, with a quiet passion that was deeply moving. She spoke of her love for art history, a passion she had set aside to support Marcus's career. Sebastian listened as if her opinions were the most fascinating things he had ever heard. So you're Chloe Sterling, he said thoughtfully, at one point, looking at her with a new, appraising light. You're married to Marcus Thorne of Innovate. Chloe's nascent calm instantly evaporated. The blood drained from her face. Yes, that's right. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps something more. I've been following his company's trajectory, he said, his tone carefully neutral. He's made quite a name for himself. Chloe didn't know what to say. The name Marcus had made for himself was now in her mind inextricably linked to lies and infidelity. She simply nodded, unable to form words. Sensing her immediate distress, Sebastian deftly changed the subject. My apologies, he said smoothly. Shop talk is dreadfully boring. Tell me more about the pre-Raphaelites. You mentioned you wrote your thesis on them. The gesture was so kind, so perceptive, it almost made her want to cry again, but this time for a different reason. He had seen her wall go up and had immediately backed away, prioritizing her comfort over his own curiosity. Marcus would have prodded seeing the conversation only through the lens of how it could benefit him. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, a comfortable silence settled between them. It wasn't the heavy, anxious silence she shared with Marcus, but a peaceful, easy quiet. As they gathered their belongings, Sebastian handed her a simple, elegant business card. "Chloe," he said, his voice sincere, "it was a genuine pleasure meeting you. If you ever find yourself in need of anything, a conversation, a contact in the city, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." "Thank you, Sebastian," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that felt too large for words. "For everything." As she walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal, she saw Amelia waiting for her, her face a mixture of worry and relief. Chloe hugged her sister tightly, the solidness of her embrace a welcome anchor. Over Amelia's shoulder, she saw Sebastian Davenport one last time. He was met by a driver holding a sign, but before he turned to go, he caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. For the first time since she saw that devastating photo, Chloe felt a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. She had stepped onto the plane, a broken woman, her world in ruins. She was stepping off of it, with the phone number of a billionaire in her pocket. Yes, but more importantly, with the memory of a simple human connection that had reminded her of her own worth. The flight had been more than just a journey from one city to another. It felt like a passage from one chapter of her life to the next. While Chloe was finding an unexpected moment of grace at 30,000 feet, Marcus Thorne was living his fantasy. The crisp mountain air, the opulent suite at the Serenity Peak Resort, and the adoring gaze of Isabella Rossi were all part of the life he felt he deserved. He was a conqueror, and this was his spoil of war. "Isn't this incredible?" Isabella purred, snuggling closer to him as they sat by the suite's grand fireplace, glasses of expensive whiskey in hand. "So much better than another boring board meeting." "I told you I'd take care of you," Marcus said, his voice slick with self-satisfaction. He took a sip of his whiskey, the smoky flavor a perfect complement to his mood. He felt powerful, untethered, and brilliant. He had masterfully arranged this escape, creating a bulletproof alibi that left Chloe none the wiser. He pictured her at home, dutifully attending her prenatal classes, a perfect, predictable wife holding down the fort while he closed the deal of a lifetime. The irony made him feel even more clever. But even in paradise, reality has a way of intruding. His phone buzzed incessantly. Emails from his team, questions about financials, urgent requests for decisions. He had delegated as much as possible, but his company was a machine that required his constant attention. "Just turn it off," Isabella complained, tracing a finger down his chest. "We're supposed to be escaping all of that." "I can't, Izzy," he sighed, pulling away slightly to type a rapid-fire response. "This is what pays for all of this." Isabella's pout was perfectly executed, a practiced expression of alluring disappointment. She was beautiful, exciting, and ambitious qualities he admired. She understood his world, or so he thought. But her understanding was shallow. She saw the perks of his success, the money, the access, the thrill, but she had no patience for the relentless grind that produced it. Unlike Chloe, who had painstakingly proofread his business plans and offered insightful critiques, Isabella's eyes glazed over whenever he tried to discuss the nuances of his work. Her support was for the lifestyle, not the labor. A subtle tension began to thread its way through their idyllic getaway. He found her constant need for social media documentation grating. Every meal, every view, every moment had to be captured, filtered, and posted. It felt performative and cheap. "Do you have to post that?" he asked, an edge to his voice as she angled her phone to get the perfect selfie of them in the hot tub. "Of course I want everyone to see how amazing this is," she said, oblivious to his irritation. "Don't you?" He didn't. The whole point of his elaborate lie was secrecy. While he had been careful to stay out of the foreground of most of her pictures, the constant broadcasting made him nervous. It was a digital trail of breadcrumbs he couldn't control. The merger she had so cleverly alluded to in her Instagram caption was another point of friction. She had begun talking about their future as if it were a settled deal. She dropped hints about being a co-founder, about wanting a more official role at Innovate, about the kind of house they would buy together once he handled the Chloe situation. Once the funding is secure and I've eased Chloe through the next few months, we can start making real plans, he'd say, a vague, non-committal promise. But the truth was, Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead. Leaving Chloe, especially with a baby on the way, was a messy, complicated affair. It would be a PR nightmare for the carefully crafted image of the family man CEO he sometimes projected to more conservative investors. Isabella was his escape, his thrill. He hadn't yet considered the possibility of her becoming his reality. The fantasy was perfect. The logistics were a nightmare he preferred to ignore. The cracks in their perfect aspen bubble were beginning to show. It was built on a foundation as unstable as his own lies. San Francisco, a budding connection. Chloe, meanwhile, was breathing. For the first time in months, she was taking full, deep breaths of the cool, fog-tinged San Francisco air. Being with her mother and Amelia was like wrapping herself in a warm, protective blanket. They didn't push her to talk. They simply created a space for her to be feeding her, making her tea, and surrounding her with an uncomplicated, unconditional love that stood in stark contrast to Marcus's transactional affection. She told them everything. She showed them Isabella's Instagram page, the words tumbling out of her in a torrent of anger and heartbreak. Amelia's face was a mask of cold warmth. "I'm going to ruin him," Amelia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to find a litigator who will tear him to shreds." "No," Chloe said, surprising both her sister and herself. "Not yet. I need to think. I need to figure out what I want, not what you want for me." For the first time, Chloe was thinking about her own needs. Her entire adult life had been centered around Marcus's ambition. Now, with that structure gone, she was left with a terrifying but exhilarating freedom. Who was she without him? What did she want for herself and her son? A few days later, still nestled in the sanctuary of her family's home, she found herself thinking about Sebastian Davenport. His kindness on the plane had been a small light in a vast darkness. On an impulse, she took out his business card. Her finger hovered over the number. What would she even say? It felt absurd, but the memory of his genuine interest, the way he had listened to her talk about art, sparked a flicker of her old self. She didn't call. Instead, she sent a brief, formal email. Subject: "Thank you, dear Miss Davenport. I just wanted to thank you again for your kindness on the flight to San Francisco. It was very much appreciated during a difficult time. I particularly enjoyed our conversation about art. Sincerely, Chloe Sterling." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. It was a small act of reaching out, of re-engaging with a world beyond her pain. She didn't expect a reply. He replied within the hour. Subject: re. "Thank you, Chloe. Please call me Sebastian. The pleasure was all mine. I've been thinking about our conversation as well. It's not often I get to discuss the Rossettis with anyone. I hope San Francisco is treating you well. If you have any free time this week, there's a small but fascinating exhibition of early photography at the SF Suomi I think you might enjoy. I'd be honored if you'd allow me to accompany you. No pressure at all, of course. The offer is there if you're interested." Best, Sebastian. Chloe's heart did a little flutter. It wasn't a pity invitation. It was a thoughtful, specific suggestion based on their shared interests. It was a date. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. Was she ready? Amelia, reading the email over her shoulder, had no such reservations. "You are going," she declared. "It is the perfect antidote to that narcissistic parasite you married." And so she went. She met him in the soaring, light-filled atrium of the museum. He was dressed in casual chinos and a soft cashmere sweater, looking even more handsome and relaxed than he had on the plane. There was no awkwardness. He greeted her with a warm smile and a light touch on her arm, guiding her toward the exhibit. As they walked through the quiet galleries, something magical happened. Chloe felt herself transforming back into the person she had been before Marcus, passionate, insightful, and intelligent. She spoke about the nuances of light and shadow in the photographs, about the historical context, about the emotional impact of the images. Sebastian listened, captivated. He asked smart questions, offered his own perspectives, and treated her as an intellectual equal. It was intoxicating. For years, her world had been reduced to the size of Marcus's ego. Now it was expanding again, filled with art ideas and intelligent conversation. After the exhibit, they sat in the museum's cafe sipping coffee. The conversation drifted from art to more personal matters. "You mentioned it was a difficult time for you," Sebastian said gently, his blue eyes holding hers. "You don't have to talk about it, but I want you to know that I'm a good listener." And so she told him. She didn't mean to, but it all came pouring out. The lies, the spa in Aspen, the other woman, the crushing humiliation. She spoke with a raw honesty she hadn't even been able to access with her sister. Sebastian listened without interruption, his expression a mixture of empathy and a slow-burning anger on her behalf. When she finished, her voice choked with emotion. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His touch was firm grounding. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and serious. "No one deserves to be treated like that. What he did is unforgivable." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I have to be honest with you. My interest in Marcus Thorne wasn't purely academic." Chloe looked at him confused. "My venture capital division was approached by Innovate for their series B funding a few months ago," he explained. "We did our due diligence. We looked into the company, the financials, and the man." A cold feeling crept up Chloe's spine. And we passed," Sebastian said, his gaze unwavering. "The numbers were inflated, the projections were unrealistic, and there were inconsistencies, rumors of cut corners and a toxic work environment. But more than that, I had a meeting with him. I didn't like his character. He struck me as a man who would build his empire on a foundation of sand, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to get to the top." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I am so incredibly sorry that you were the one he chose to sacrifice." The validation was so powerful, it felt like a physical force. It wasn't just her pain, her intuition. A man like Sebastian Davenport, a man whose entire reputation was built on integrity, had seen the same flaws in Marcus that she had been trying to ignore for years. She hadn't been blind or stupid. She had been loyal to a man who was unworthy of it. Their parallel worlds were beginning to converge. While Marcus's fantasy in Aspen was starting to fray at the edges, Chloe's reality, in San Francisco, was solidifying. She was standing on the firm ground of truth, supported by family, and now by the unexpected profound connection with a man who saw her, valued her, and confirmed that the fault was not in her, but in the man she had promised to love. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank canvas, and she was finally ready to be the artist of her own life. The return flight to Los Angeles was a journey into the storm. Chloe's time in San Francisco had been a balm, a period of healing and rediscovery, cocooned by the love of her family and the startlingly gentle presence of Sebastian. He had called her every day since their museum visit, their conversations meandering for hours, building an intimacy that felt more real than anything she had ever shared with Marcus. She was returning not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her own narrative. She knew a confrontation was inevitable, and for the first time she wasn't afraid. Amelia had insisted on flying back with her, a silent, formidable bodyguard in a power suit. "I'm not letting you walk into that viper's nest alone," she had stated, and Chloe had been too grateful to argue. As they deplaned at LAX, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Unknown. He's on AA flight 2451 from Denver." Denver landing at gate 42B in 20 minutes. Thought you should know. You deserve better. Chloe stared at the message, her blood running cold. Denver, not Aspen. Of course. He would use a major hub to cover his tracks. But who had sent the message? A disgruntled employee? A friend of a friend? It didn't matter. It was a gift. A piece of leverage. Change of plans, Chloe said to Amelia, her voice steady, a newfound steel in her tone. We're going to gate 42B. Amelia's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Oh, this is going to be good. They found a coffee shop with a clear view of the gate and waited. The 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating adrenaline. This would not be a screaming match. It would be a quiet surgical removal of Marcus Thorne from her life. And then she saw them. Marcus and Isabella emerged from the jet bridge, looking for all the world like a chic, successful couple returning from a romantic getaway. He was laughing at something she said, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. Isabella was radiant, basking in the glow of their stolen weekend, her hand resting possessively on his lower back. They looked so comfortable, so entitled, so completely oblivious. The sight of them together in the flesh was a physical blow, but Chloe didn't flinch. She watched as they stopped to kiss, a long, lingering kiss, full of a shared secret. That was the moment Chloe chose to move. With Amelia at her side, she walked calmly towards them. She stopped a few feet away, simply standing there, waiting. It was Isabella who saw her first. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure horrified shock. Her face went pale. She instinctively dropped her hand from Marcus's back and took a half step away from him, as if proximity to him had suddenly become toxic. Marcus, sensing Isabella's sudden tension, followed her gaze. When his eyes landed on Chloe, his face went through a rapid, ugly series of transformations. Confusion, then dawning horror, and finally a pathetic cornered panic. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face. Chloe! He stammered, his voice a choked whisper. He automatically took his arm from around Isabella, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. What are you doing here? I thought you were at home. Clearly, Chloe said, her voice astoundingly calm and clear. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. She held his gaze, letting the full weight of his betrayal hang in the air between them. Her presence, her stillness, her visible pregnancy. It was a more powerful indictment than any shouted accusation could ever be. It's not what it looks like. He fumbled the classic, pathetic refrain of the guilty. Chloe almost laughed. She gestured slightly towards the still frozen Isabella. It looks like you enjoyed your business trip to New York, she said, her voice dripping with ice. Or was it Aspen or Denver? It's so hard to keep track of your lies. Marcus looked frantically between the two women, his mask of confident CEO crumbling to reveal the weak, deceitful man beneath. Isabella is just a colleague. There was a conference. Isabella, who had been silent until now, let out a short, bitter laugh. A conference? You told me you were leaving her. You told me we were celebrating our future. She looked at Marcus with utter contempt, realizing in that instant that she was just as much a pawn in his game as the woman she had helped him betray. Shut up, Isabella, Marcus hissed, his panic turning to anger. Don't you dare speak to her that way. Chloe said, her voice sharp and commanding. She looked at Isabella, not with hatred, but with a flicker of something that looked almost like pity. He told you whatever you wanted to hear. That's what he does. He builds worlds out of lies. You should get out while you still can. With that, Chloe turned her back on Isabella and focused her full undivided attention on her husband. I went home for a few things, she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate and far more terrifying tone. I left my rings on top of the baby monitor you sent. Consider them my severance package. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. We have nothing further to discuss." She looked at him one last time at the pathetic, crumbling facade of the man she had once loved. She felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound, liberating emptiness. He had no more power over her. She turned to leave. "Chloe." "Wait," Marcus called out, desperation cracking his voice. "We can talk about this. Don't do this. Think about the baby." Chloe stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Oh, she said, her voice carrying back to him, clear and final. "I am thinking about my baby. And he deserves a father who understands the meaning of truth and integrity. He deserves better than you." And with that, she and Amelia walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the terminal, caught between the woman he had betrayed and the woman he had used, his carefully constructed world shattered on the sterile floor of LAX. Walking away from him was the hardest and easiest thing she had ever done. Each step was a reclamation of her own life. By the time they reached the exit, a sense of profound peace had settled over her. The storm had passed. As they stepped out into the California sunshine, Chloe's phone rang. The name on the screen made her smile. "Sebastian." She answered, her voice warm. "You're back," he said. "How are you?" "I'm good," Chloe replied, and she was surprised to find that it was the absolute truth. "I'm really good." "I have some news," he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "There's a foundation I chair, one that provides grants to up-and-coming artists and curators. There's a director-level position opening up. It would mean moving to San Francisco, but I thought of you. I thought you'd be perfect for it." Chloe stopped walking, her breath catching in her throat. A job, a career, a new life, in a new city. It was everything she hadn't dared to dream of offered to her in a moment of perfect, beautiful serendipity. "Sebastian," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude and hope. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said gently. "Say you'll let me take you to dinner to celebrate your new beginning." Chloe looked up at the vast, clear blue sky. A new dawn was breaking. "I'd love that," she said, a brilliant, genuine smile spreading across her face. "I would love that. Very much." In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband getting caught. It was about a woman, Chloe, who was pushed to her absolute limit and discovered a strength she never knew she had. She traded a life that glittered on the surface for one that was truly golden within. She found out that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most beautiful destinations, not just a first-class seat on a plane, but a first-class life. She chose herself, she chose her son, and she opened her heart to a future built on respect, kindness, and genuine partnership. Her ex-husband was left with the ruins of his lies, a testament to the fact that character is the one thing money can't buy and deceit can't build. What did you think of Chloe's story? Have you ever seen someone turn a moment of crisis into a major life upgrade? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.